Welcome, all respected guests. Welcome. So, before beginning our discourse today, first of all, I'm praying to my spiritual master and to Gauranga Mahaprabhu, Radha and Krishna for their mercy, so that I can get out of the way and become a conduit for the message of pure devotion. Namo Sristambanamapi Suchiputram Atra Surupam Rupam Tasthagata Muripurim Vaturim Koshvatim Radha Kundam Girivadam Ho Radhika Madhvasam Rapto Yasya Pratita Kripaya Shri Guru Tammanatosmi Gurave Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadali Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namah Anandalilamaya Vigrahaya Hemabhadibhyatchavi Sundaraya Tasmai Mahapremarasapradaya Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Bhaktya Bhina Aparada Lakshay Jivdasta Kamari Tora Kamadi Kripa Maitam Shanam Prapanna Vrinde Namaste Charanara Vindam Vrinde Namaste Charanara Vindam Govinda Damo Naramadaveti Govinda Damo Naramadaveti Govinda Damo Naramadaveti Govinda Damo Naramadaveti Hey Krishna Hey Yadava Hey Saketi Govinda Damodara Madhaveti Shama Sundar Shikanda Shekhar Smaraha Smurali Manohara Radhikar Sukumama Kripanite Supriya Charna King Kurim Kuru Tavai Vasmi Najivami Tvaya Bina Jivikaya Devitam Namam Charnantikam. First of all, I offer my Sastang Dandavat Puspanjali in my heart, like offering of flowers thousands and thousands of times at the lotus feet of my spiritual master, my supremely worshipful holy Guru. Asmadya Parmaradatam Guru Pada Padma Nitilila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Ashtotarasat Sri Rupanugacharya Varya Sila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. Secondly, I offer my pranam. I bow down with great respect thousands of times at the feet of my Guru's Guru, my Param Gurudev, to Srila Prabhupada, to his Guru and his Guru and his Guru and all the great spiritual masters in our unbroken succession of Gurus going back thousands of years to see Krishna himself. They are the pranali, the channel through which the divine knowledge, transcendental wisdom, and pure love descend from the eternal realm throughout the ages until this very day. And finally, I offer my pranam, my respects to all of you, my dear brothers and sisters, all Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, Vancha Kalpatarusa, Kripasandho Bheda Pudina Pavane, Vaishnavibhyo, Namo Namah. Srila Gurudev Ki! So today, we continue with part 2 of this seminar on the subject of the synthesis of science, philosophy, and religion. So, let us begin. These disciplines of human life appear to be disparate. They appear to be often incompatible. But actually, they are completely compatible if they're understood correctly. And they are the steps on the journey of the human being who is inquiring about the truth. Science, as we come to know it today, was developed actually out of philosophy, the philosophical tradition at first. Of course, philosophy, classical philosophy in the West since the time of the ancient Greeks, it had various departments such as ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics, and so on. And so the portion of philosophy was dealing with understanding the phenomenal world is called the philosophy of nature. And metaphysics was a part of that philosophy of nature, understanding the direct phenomenal world around us. Then, within philosophy, there is an area of searching for the cause of everything, and that is the real meaning of philosophy. In modern times, if you ask someone for the definition of philosophy, even if you go to some university textbook, encyclopedia of philosophy, then you cannot find the proper explanation or the original spirit of the classical philosophers. Philosophy is often defined as something as the inquiry, investigation into the world, and so on. A set of ideas, different perspectives. But actually, in Greek, philosophy means the activity of the lovers of wisdom. Philo indicates the loving, and Sophie means a Sophia, wisdom. Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. So, what is Sophia? In the ancient tradition, the classical philosophy, Sophia has a specific meaning. It means to understand what is the cause of this world. Where did this world come from? Why does it exist? Why does the world have the particular, broadly, to speak in broad terms, why does it have the form that it has? And thirdly, what is the purpose of our life? These three things are considered to be, in the classical tradition, Sophia, wisdom, to know what is this world, why is it the way it is, and what is our purpose in life. And so, the question comes, what is the purpose of this Sophia? In other words, why is it that a certain subset of human beings, the philosophers, why is it that they love Sophia? Why do they love wisdom and therefore they're called philosophers? Why? Because Sophia, wisdom, leads in Greek, the Greek word, to theoria. Theoria means that by wisdom we come to understand that the world has an original cause, and that is the Supreme Being. So, for example, Socrates used to use the word summum bonum. The summum bonum, that means the absolute good. Whatever good is present in any things, then all the goodness has come from an original good, which is the totality of the good. That is the summum bonum. And Srila Prabhupada, he often used to use this word. In fact, in his Srimad Bhagavatam, in the first canto, is described. The Srimad Bhagavatam does not aim on the level of understanding God. Because when you think about God, things are separate. There is the world, and everything is separate, and God is in another dimension somewhere. And so there's a dualistic understanding can be there. But Prabhupada said the Srimad Bhagavatam aims to understand truth on the level of summum bonum. The totality of the absolute good. So Socrates would use that. And then in the next generation, Plato also would use that. And then Aristotle, he would use the word, the prime mover. The prime mover. So in Sanskrit, we use the same Adikarta, the original doer, the first agent. He Jagat Viparivartate, by whom the whole world is moving. The prime mover, the first mover, the first agent. So Sophia, the first aspect of Sophia was to understand, what is this world? Where did it come from? It is the manifestation of the summum bonum, the prime mover, the Adikarta, the original agent that is God. And then the second thing, why does it have broadly the shape that it has? And the answer in the classical philosophy is that this world is like a shadow of an eternal, where eternal forms exist. And that is also, the Vedas also give that conclusion. Shrishti stiti pralaya sadhana shakti eka chayeva yasya bhuvanani bibharti durga. Durga, the material energy of the Lord, is manifesting the world, and the world has particular forms and shapes because it's the shadow of the divine realm. Why is the grass green and the sky blue? Because the grass is green and the sky is blue in the spiritual world. That's why. So, and then the third thing, what is the purpose of our life? In classical philosophy, the purpose was considered to be to attain the state of theoria. That means to be completely absorbed in meditation, contemplation upon the Supreme Being. The idea in classical philosophy is that the Supreme Being himself is absorbed in meditation upon himself. And when the living entity joins him in that most auspicious activity of theoria, that is the ultimate good and the ultimate happiness for the living entity. So that's considered to be a type of trance-like state in the classical philosophy. So that's the real meaning in the ancient, but you see, throughout time, words start to lose their meaning, right? Throughout history, words mean something, and gradually throughout the senses, they lose their significance. So that was the original significance of philosophy and being a philosopher in the prominent classical schools. So now, so you can see that naturally from philosophy comes this element of natural theology, which means how far can a human being by his own intellect understand what is the cause of this world and come to the conclusion that there is a God. So according to Srimad Bhagavatam, Guna Prakashe Anumiyate Bhavan, one can infer the existence of God by the manifestations of the gunas. So Baladeva Vibhushan Prabhu, he comments that a logician, if he's very careful, he can arrive at this conclusion that there must be a God, but only the bare facts, not further than this. To go further than this, then we need actually revealed theology. In other words, that the Supreme Being, he intervenes in this world and reveals himself and shows us the path how to find him as he is. Yavanaham yatha bhavo madrupa guna karmatmaka. As Sri Krishna revealed himself to Lord Brahma at the beginning of the creation. Yava, as much as I am, my form, my qualities and pastimes, take up this process of bhakti. Astu te madanugrahat. And by the process of bhakti, by my blessings, you will realize me. So, if one wants to go further than that, just that knowledge of a bare fact, there is such a thing as God, then we need grace and to follow the revelation, revealed theology. So, this is the, I've just given a broad summary of some of the principles of how these three areas of human investigation and discipline are related. Now, to enter into this subject, it's important to understand where we are today. Generally, because the way people think today is shared by everyone else who they associate with, so they think it's perfectly normal, it's completely impartial, and it's not biased in any way. But whoever you are, wherever you are, whichever period in time, everyone's thoughts are shaped and conditioned by that historical and intellectual period. And so the modern period in which we find ourselves today is one of dark ignorance, actually. Even though we may be proud that we have undergone the Enlightenment era and broke away from the dogmas of the Dark Ages. But actually the Enlightenment was a wrong turn. Stop, reverse, get back on the road. So we want to discuss why the modern outlook of life is so riddled with misconception, contradiction, and inconclusiveness. And we can do that only by comparing it to the classical period from which the modern period developed. This modern period is actually like a devolution or a corruption of the way that people thought prior to the Enlightenment period. And then from there, I want to take us from the classical conception of the world to the Vedic. Because the classical conception, even though it's far superior to the modern view of the world, it still has some defect that the Vedic conception perfects, and that brings us to the platform of perfect knowledge. Now, when I'm doing it, you may think, oh, Prem Prayojan, this is like something new, but it's absolutely not new at all, because if you study Vedanta Sutra, there you'll see that Srila Vyasadeva is taking the various philosophical schools that were around at that time and comparing them and going through them and then bringing persons from there to Vedanta. Now, if you study comparatively the Vedic philosophical schools, the first one, which is foundational, and it's necessary to have a discussion of all the others, and that is the Nyaya Sutra of Gautam Rishi. Nyaya Sutra. And you'll find that the Nyaya school of Gautam Rishi is very, very similar. Only some minor differences between his conceptual system and the classical system of Aristotle in ancient Greece. Because the Nyaya system discusses about jati, universals, and how universals are instantiated in the individual objects of this world. And so that's the point of commonality between, very powerful and fundamental point of commonality between Gautam Rishi's school and the classical philosophy in the West, Aristotelian philosophy. So what Vyasadeva does in the Vedanta Sutra, he looks at the Nyaya school and he accepts what are the good points of that, but then he moves on and gives the higher and higher conclusions until he comes to the final conclusion that is called Vedanta. So I'm just doing the same thing, following the same principle, but especially related to everyone here. because we can see most of the people here, they're from the West. And so our conditioning and our way of thinking about the world has been developed in historical layers and cultural layers. And we're not even aware of it because we're just born into that atmosphere. Like a fish is swimming around and someone talks about water. What water? Fish is not aware of water because it's just everywhere. It's so familiar to him. He doesn't even not aware of it. So, but at the same time, we can see we have a number of people here from India. But India has also, for quite some generations now, been subject to the scientific worldview. Is it true or not? Yes. Yes. So, we'll look at the specific nature of the modern worldview so we can identify our own psychological conditioning and correct that coming to the classical level, and then look at the Vedic conclusion. Srila Vyasadeva also goes through the stages when discussing Vedanta, because you can't just go from where you are directly to Vedanta. There are some steps involved. It has to be a samvad, a conversation. All the spiritual knowledge is transmitted in the form of a conversation. The Bhagavad Gita is a conversation. Rup Shiksha, teachings to Rupa Goswami, is a conversation. Sanatan Shiksha, Ramananda Samvad, the word Samvad means conversation. All Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Purana, is a conversation between Sutta Goswami and Shonaka Rishi, and within that conversation, it's a conversation between Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadev Goswami, and within that it's a conversation between Vidura and Maitreya. And within that it's a conversation between Devahuti and Kapildev, and like this. So this is the way. There's no direct, just 1-2 steps. It is a conversation. So let us begin the journey. Are you ready? Yeah? Okay, let's go. So Srila Vyasadeva, he gave Vedanta. We consider he gave the Vedanta over 5,000 years ago. The modern scholars today, they say about just over 1,000 BC. But they'll get it right one day. About 384 BC, Aristotle, he presented his philosophy. According to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Aristotle was influenced by Gautam Rishi. In fact, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has written an article where he lists all the so many Greek philosophers such as Pythagoras and Plato and others, and he gives the information which philosopher of India influenced which philosopher of Greece. So now, for the Western worldview, Aristotle, his metaphysics and his logic are extremely, extremely influential, and they're so influential that many religionists from the world's great religions, they used to use the framework of Aristotle to establish their own theological conclusions, particularly in regard to the existence of God. And so in the Islamic tradition, do you have any people here from the Islamic tradition? No? Chan Kaz is not here tonight. So Averroes, he was very much influenced, and he would cite the metaphysics of Aristotle and use that to present Islam. Also in Islam, in Judaism, Maimonides also used the same conceptual framework. And within Christianity, Thomas Aquinas was the main theologian. So this is fascinating because we're seeing that all the main religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they have a common philosophical root in ancient Greece, and ancient Greece was influenced by the ancient India. Like this. So I'm discussing today in broad terms, in civilizational terms, and one of the reasons is that perhaps you know that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in the late 1800s, he said, one day, very soon, the devotees of Bengal and the devotees from Russia and Prussia will be dancing together in ecstasy and chanting, Jai Sachinandan Go Hari, Jai Sachinandan Go Hari. You know, he said that. And it wasn't until after he'd passed away, and about 80 years after he'd made that statement, that it actually became true. And in our lifetimes, we've been to India and seen huge crowds of Russians and Prussians, because Germany didn't exist as a nation, and so that area, Russians and Prussians and Bengalis all dancing together and glorifying Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said this, and at that time maybe someone would think that's impossible. It's not going to happen, but it did. It did. So he said something else. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur made another prophecy or prediction. He said that in the future, all the various religious schools and churches will, when they have given up any portion of their conception which is offensive, they will merge like rivers merging together into the one universal church known as the Brahma Sampradaya. The Brahma Sampradaya. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said this will happen in the not too distant future, actually. So that other prediction he made, which seemed impossible at the time, we've already seen that now with our own eyes. So we should understand that this very prediction that he has made, which also looks like simply quite impossible right now, and we may not see it in our lifetime, but sometime soon, that will also take place. The merging of all the various philosophical and religious schools into the one original universal church, he calls it, the Brahma Sampradaya, because at the beginning of the universe, Aham eva sameva gre nanyadyat sadasad param paschadaham yaritascha yo visasyes tasosmaham. See, Krishna gives the teaching of pure bhakti, the Chatushloki Bhagavatam, to Brahma. So that is actually the original church. And then schism after schism after schism took place within the universe into the chaos that we have now in Kali Yuga. And by the power of Harinam Sankirtan and the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, all that dissension between the various groups, it will gradually be dissolved and they'll come back together, and the universal order will be restored again by the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he has made that prediction. But that's not just going to happen like one day you wake up and all the Christians and Muslims and Jews are wearing tilak. It's not going to happen like, how will it happen? It will happen through dialogue, through informed discussion and finding the points of commonality and common roots like that. So this is what we're presenting here, trying to be in some way a small instrument by which the desire and the premonition, actually, of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, it may come gradually in the future. So now, here we are. The modern worldview, the classical worldview, Vedic worldview. Three things. The main elements of the modern worldview, we can say, can be expressed by the concept of the mechanism. People today have a mechanistic idea of reality. In fact, mechanism, the analogy of the machine is used to explain everything, right? Your body, it's like a machine. Your brain is like a machine. That's called more specialized computationalism. Your brain is like a computer. It's so funny, actually, throughout history, before computers and machines were developed, and they just had like pumping systems and things like that. They said, oh, well, the brain is like valves and pump. It's like a pumping hydraulic system, and then gradually, as science progressed, the people just take whatever the latest technology is and use that analogy to explain their brain. So now we have computers, and your brain's like a computer, you know. If they invent something else, then it'll be the next thing. So the modern view of the world is mechanistic, and one of the features of the mechanistic world point is reductionism. And that is, in order to understand something, you have to take it apart. It's made out of pieces. reality can be disassembled. And you break it down, and when you come to the smallest pieces, then you can understand that the macro forms of things are simply the aggregate of their micro constituents. So that is the reductionistic view of the world. And so the modern view is very much immersed in the idea of just particles in motion, atoms and the void. Now, in classical philosophy, there is we discuss, it's about getting theoria, that the forms of this world are irreducible and they're based on transcendent forms. And the goal of our life is to meditate and realize that those transcendent forms. And in Vedic culture, philosophy, the word for philosophy in Vedic culture is darshan. So darshan means the avalokana, to see. It means upalabdhi, to attain. So the word darshan comes from drish dhatu. It means avalokana and the upalabdhi. And also the sakshatkar, direct experience. So in Vedic culture, philosophy doesn't mean a set of concepts or a theoretical frameworks, which is the lens by which we analyze things, but it literally means attaining, seeing, and having direct experience of a indivisible, non-dual, eternal reality. Now, the question comes, how did our modern mechanistic, reductionistic viewpoint come about? And is it really useful or is it harmful? What are the dangers of the mechanistic and reductionistic worldview? So let's go back to before the Enlightenment, when the classical philosophy was common everywhere. You know, in the West, every country was religious. The churches were full, and the church was extremely, extremely powerful. And even though there may be some persons who didn't believe in God, by and large, the whole society was very religious. There were kings, and the kings were meant to be the representative of God on earth, and they also patronized and supported religion as the true foundation of the fabric of the whole society. Now we see that's disappeared in modern times. But that's what it was like before the Enlightenment. So the religion was very powerful because the academics and the intellectuals, they had their reasons, their logical arguments why God exists. And it was based on the classical school of the Aristotle and the analysis of the four causes. So Aristotle, he said, if you want to investigate something, understand anything, you have not given a proper explanation until you've accounted for four types of cause. So causation is also the foundation of our Vedanta system. Obviously, Vedanta depends on divine revelation, but logic and reason, which is in harmony with the divine revelation, is accepted in the Vedic culture. So there are four types of causes. First is called the formal cause. What's the cause of the form of something? Then the ingredient cause. What is something made of? Then the efficient cause or the instrumental cause. That is, what is the instrument that makes the ingredient into the form that it has? You see? And then the last one is called the final cause, or that is called the teleological cause, the telos. What's the ultimate purpose of a thing? So all of these terms are also in our Vedic philosophy. The ingredient cause in Vedanta is called upadan karan, right? The upadan karan. And the instrumental cause is called the nimitta karan. So there are also words for the others, but we'll come to that later because it's a little bit different. Now, when the general person thinks about these four causes, Well, let's give some examples to illustrate the four causes. So perhaps let's say a house. If you want to say, well, explain this house, then first of all, you start with the formal cause. The cause of the form is the architect's plan. You see, so we've got the architect's plan there. That's the cause of the form. Because the house, it could be 2-story, 3-story, could be a bungalow, whatever. So there has to be some design behind it. So then the ingredient cause. What's the ingredient of cause of the house? Give you a clue. Actually, I'm not seeing many stone houses here. So the stone or the wood or whatever, the glass and everything, those are the ingredients that make it. So then there's the instrumental cause. What was the thing that got the ingredients and arranged them in the form that it is? And you can think, well, the construction worker, right? He got all the parts and he put them together and made the form as it is according to the formal cause. And then the final cause of the house, it's teleology. The purpose for which the house exists is so that this happy family can live there. Right? So, in a general way, this is the way that ordinary people understand these four causes. And by ordinary people today, that means even in academia, many scholars understand the four causes in this way. And but actually, this was not exactly what Aristotle was saying. Something was lost. He was misunderstood. So you can see in modern times, such as Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist who wrote the book The God Delusion, he takes the arguments for these existential causes and actually he doesn't. He defeats the straw man. He defeats the understanding of the four causes that I've just said. That's like a simplistic way of explaining things for children. It's a little bit puerile and not fully developed. It's actually a degradation or an abbreviation of the actual teaching. So we'll come to that. But first, what is science? What is science? So the word science wasn't a word that people, it comes from the scio, means I know in Latin. So it wasn't a word that people used before the Enlightenment period. It's very popular now, but before that it was not a commonly used word, and there wasn't even agreement of what science could be. So one of the Enlightenment thinkers, that is Francis Bacon, there he is, and his dates are there. In his treatise, The Advancement of Learning, he said that natural science and philosophy, they make inquiry and take consideration of the same natures. So philosophy or metaphysics and the natural science, they're both inquiring into the same thing, the nature of the world. He said, but how? Science makes inquiry only as to the material and efficient causes and not to the forms. So he's saying that of the four causes, science doesn't deal with formal cause, it doesn't deal with the teleological final cause. Let science be just, we're only going to deal with what things are made of and how they bump into each other, what happens, how they're instrumentally acting on each other. Okay? Is it clear? I'll give another quote from, this is another quote from the Novum Organum by Francis Bacon. He said, thus, let the investigation of forms which are eternal and immutable. Now you can see that he believes in the classical philosophy, right? He believes that there are eternal, immutable forms upon which the forms of this world are based. But he said, let the investigation of the forms which are eternal and immutable constitute metaphysics, and let the investigation only of instrumental, that means efficient, instrumental, and matter, the ingredient, let that constitute physics. You see? And thus the science of physics was born and defined in this way. So it was basically an abbreviation or contraction of the classical worldview. You understand? The classical worldview was analyzing, there you go, there's a summary for you there. The classical worldview was analyzing the world according to 4 causes: formal, ingredient, instrumental, and final. And Francis Bacon said, well, let that be metaphysics, and let's just bracket off the things which are eternal. Let's bracket off the things which are actually beyond our investigation and the power to explain, and let's just deal with the things we can deal with right now and explain. That's the ingredients of things and how they instrumentally act upon each other. The ingredient and instrumental causes. You see? So he wasn't an atheist. He wasn't against the classical worldview. He just contracted it to make a particular discipline called physics, which we can say is actually the foundational discipline of everything today. Because if you study chemistry, ultimately it's down to physics, right? Because the chemicals you have to study atoms. If you study biology, well, the biology is ultimately down to the chemistry, and the chemistry is down to the physics. Right? And if you study psychology, so the psychology is nowadays about the brain, and the brain is biological, and the biology is made of the chemistry, and the chemistry is made of the physics. So you can see that the contraction that he made of the classical worldview into physics then became the main worldview. Everyone forgot about eternal things and original forms and the transcendental world, and just became concerned with these 2 causes. And basically atoms and the void, particles moving and striking each other. And because that approach produced some results, by taking that approach, they were able to develop science and make medicine and cars and trains and electricity and airplanes and phones and everything. And so because this approach offers to us some power and control and enjoyment in the world, so now everyone changes their faith from the faith in God to the faith in science. And can you see how it happened? How did it happen? This is how we arrived where we are today and the way people think. Now, let's go into it a little more deeply. Are you ready to go to the next step? Yes? Okay, good. What are the implications of mechanistic reductionism? Previously, it was considered that a human being is an instantiation of the form of a human. There is a perfect form of the human, and that form is, the individual is an instantiation of that universal. And so, the human being is a whole, integrated entity, and the human being cannot be reduced to parts. A human being cannot be just explained by the parts. And it's a fact, if someone's pran leaves the body, if someone dies, that means the pran leaves the body, all the atoms are there. Okay, now bring it back to life. You cannot. You can't bring it back to life, because the organizational principle isn't the atoms. The organizational principle is the pran. And when the pran leaves, that's a very subtle, fine energy. When the pran leaves, then all the atoms there, but the molecules, they don't act as one body. Now it's every molecule for himself, right? And the whole thing begins to break down, disintegrate, and rot. So, but now what happens is, once you come to the mechanistic idea, now things are not whole forms, but they're simply an aggregate of parts. And so they're comparable to a machine. So let's say if you have a plant like a tree, it has intrinsic teleology, intrinsic telos, that it grows and it produces fruit and it produces seeds, and the seeds produce other trees. So living things, they have a type of immanent teleology by which they perfect themselves. They grow and they reproduce and so on. But machines don't do that. You see? Make a machine that produces, that you have a machine, and if you smash it with a hammer, it heals, right? If you smash a finger with a hammer, your nail breaks and it goes black. But what happens? It falls off and another one grows back. Take your hammer and smash your car, come back the next day, and it's the same, it's a smash. It's not going to grow. It doesn't have an immanent teleology to perfect itself, because it's not a substantial form. It's just an aggregate of parts. It's a machine. So that which is not a natural living form is just an aggregate of parts. That's called an artifact. But now when you move from the classical worldview to the mechanistic worldview, we're all machines. We're all like artifacts. Now, one of the implications of being a machine or a biological machine or an artifact is that a biological machine or artifact is everything it does is deterministic. If you know the original configurations of the atoms in this body and which direction they're moving, you can calculate everything he's going to do for his whole life. It's all deterministic, right? So that means now that you actually don't have will. You don't have free will. If you don't have free will, you don't have responsibility either for your actions. Oh, it's so sad. Okay, he killed a few children, but it wasn't his fault. There's no responsibility. And then the third thing is that a machine, we mentioned this, a machine doesn't have its own immanent teleology to develop and perfect itself in any way. It doesn't have an inherent purpose. So if you have a tree and you cut it down and then you chop it into planks of wood and then you nail them all together, you can make a boat. The purpose of the tree isn't to be a boat. The purpose of the tree is to grow and produce fruit, and the fruit will produce more trees and so on. But once the wood is cut and put together into an aggregate, and the boat is now an artifact. It's now an artifact. And its teleology, or its purpose, is actually not inherent in the wood, but it was superimposed upon it from the outside. So now, if we see ourselves as being we can be understood by reductionism, we're machines, we're artifacts. Now, our life doesn't have any inherent purpose. You have to, just like an artifact, you impose whatever purpose you want onto the parts and use them as you like. So that's, now we have what we have, the philosophy since the 60s. If it feels good, do it. Just do the meaning is whatever you want it to be. There's no objective, eternal purpose to your life anymore. You see? And so this contraction from the classical philosophy into the mechanistic worldview is not just some innocuous abbreviation or contraction, but it has extreme, detrimental, deleterious consequences. And that's what we're seeing playing out in society today. In the godlessness and the sinfulness and the nihilism, the meaninglessness, the endless trivial stimulation and entertainment with no ultimate purpose is a result of this collapse of the worldview that took place from after the Enlightenment, as a result of the Enlightenment. How incredible in Kali Yuga that the historical period that was the downfall of the meaning of human life is called the Enlightenment. They should have called it the blackout, the power cut, the intellectual power cut, where everything failed. And so that's how Kali Yuga, and just, of course, the cause is the world itself is God's universal form, and it's going through the ages, the different ages, but I'm just describing the symptoms of how the Kali Yuga has become more and more intense up to this present moment. Okay, so now, this mechanistic worldview is also completely contradictory. It is incoherent on its own terms. So reductionism is filled with the contradictions, and so we're going to discuss now the fallacy of reductionism. Okay. So, to understand the fallacy of the modern worldview, then we'll have to come back to the four causes and understand them properly as they were meant to be understood, not as a child just learns them in a basic way. It's like the architect's plan and the bricks of the house and the builder, and then the family will live there. That's not how they are actually meant to be understood. So, first of all, I want to look at the ingredient cause first. The ingredient cause. in the classical philosophy and also in our Vedic philosophy, what is the ingredient cause of the world? It's called pradhan. Pradhan. So pradhan is a pure potential energy. And in the Aristotelian metaphysics of ancient Greece, the ingredient of the whole world is also, it was called prime matter. And prime matter is matter which is a pure potential. So it's exactly the same concept. We have pradhan in our Vedic culture, and in the Aristotelian metaphysics, it is called the prime matter. That is matter which is a pure potential energy that doesn't yet have any form. It has no form. Now, why, philosophically speaking, does the classical philosophy say that the ingredient of everything is a formless potential? Why can't you say it's an atom or it's whatever it is, some kind of substance? The reason is because as soon as you have something that has a form, then the question arises, well, what's that form made of? Right? And so the ingredient of all forms is something that doesn't have form. And when form acts on the ingredient, then it takes a shape and becomes an existing thing, an existing substantial form. And so, in Vedic culture and in classical culture, the ingredient of the world is the prime matter or pradhan. It's a pure potential. Is it clear why the cause of the house is not the bricks? The ingredient cause is not the bricks? Why? Why can you not say the ingredient cause of this house are the bricks? Yeah?
Because the bricks are made of something?
Yeah, exactly. We could say, well, what are the bricks made of? It's a clay. What's the clay made of? Carbon. What's the carbon made of? Like that. So it just it ends up being an infinite regress. So the ingredient in metaphysics, classical and Vedic, is the pure potential, prime matter or pradhan. So the formal cause is something else. It's something that's combined with the ingredient to make something come into existence. So in classical philosophy, it's called the universals. They're universals, they're eternal. There is the universal, say, human, of which each and every human is a particular instantiation of that universal. And that philosophical idea is the same in Gautam Rishi's Nyaya. In Gautam Rishi's Nyaya, the universals are called jati. So you can see there, that's the Greek philosophical term, universals. And in Indian, the logic, Gautam Rishi's Nyaya Sutras, it's called jati. So Aristotle and Gautam Rishi believe that there are these things called universals. They're everywhere. They're invisible, and when they're connected with the material energy, then the forms of this world manifest. So, for example, if there are 3 apples on the table, this is apple, this is apple, this is apple. Why? Because this is the one instantiation of the jati of appleness. This is another instantiation of the jati of appleness, like this and so on. So that's formal and ingredient. I just want to add that in Vedanta, the jati is considered to be a vikalpa. It's a concept, it's a creation of the mind. They don't exist. But if you understand it in this way, it's a step on coming towards Vedanta. So now, the instrumental cause. The instrumental cause is the interaction between forms. So once the prime matter has got a form, now it can bump into another form and have an effect on it, right? Like a stone rolling down a hill, it hits another that has form. When it meets with something else that has form, it acts instrumentally to move the other stone. So that's called instrumental cause, one thing acting on another. And so then you have the final cause, or the teleological cause. So that is called in Sanskrit artha. Like, you have the 4 Purusha arthas. It means the purpose. So in human life, what's the purpose? You do dharma. And you do dharma what? To become prosperous, artha. and then you get your artha so you can get calm, fulfill your desires. And when you're not satisfied by fulfilling desires, you want to get moksha. And if you have the association of a saint, then you realize moksha is useless. And then you have the pancham purushartha, the fifth goal of life, which is Prem, pure love. Only pure love. So in Sanskrit, the word for telos, or the teleological goal, is the artha or prayojan. And but that is the arthas as we've just described. There's a hierarchy of arthas, right? Dharma, artha, kama, moksha, prem. So arthas are in hierarchies. So if you reduce the arthas down to their most rudimentary form, the most rudimentary form of the final cause, that is just the power to produce an effect or a range of effects. Think about it in this way. If there's a stone rolling down a hill and it's about to touch another stone, now a number of things could happen. When it touches the stone, it could just pass straight through it. I'm just saying hypothetically. When it touches the stone, the two stones could just go straight up into the sky. But it doesn't. When it touches the stone, it could turn into a bunch of flowers. Whatever, like that. No, but what happens, we know that this stone has the telos, or the power to produce the effect of when it touches that stone, it hits it, and then the other stone starts moving. Like that. And so, this is the fourth type of cause. That means just on a surface level, how one thing has the power to have an effect on another thing, to produce an effect or a range of effects. So in the classical philosophy, that's the most rudimentary understanding of the teleology. Now, this is what is interesting. Remember, Francis Bacon said, science is this. Science is this. We're going to bracket off the final cause. We're going to bracket off the formal cause. We're only going to deal with the ingredient and the instrumental cause. How the ingredients act upon each other. And that's what science became. However, it's impossible. Why? Because you may think that you're listening today to Prem Prayojan speaking to you about metaphysics. But what we're actually doing is psychology. Because you can, in your mind, you can abstract these four causes. And in your mind, these four causes are separate from each other. Just like the architect's plan is one thing, the bricks are another thing, the builder is another thing, and the family is another thing. So this is called vikalpa in Sanskrit. A non-correlated thought construct. Our mind can abstract from the world because reality is one whole non-dual substance. But the nature of the mind is vikalpa. Sankalpa, vikalpa. It accepts something, it extracts something and rejects something else. And so we isolate things from the world that can never be separated. That is our psychological state of dvandva. We're in duality. We're in a state of dvandva, duality. And being in that state, we make concepts, separate things and separate thoughts, which actually can never be separated from each other in reality. So just as the architect's plan and the bricks and the builder and like that concept of the four causes, it's all separate in our mind. But the actual concept of the four causes, it is inseparable. So, for example, we're discussing the fallacy of reductionism, the inseparability of causes. Let me just go back so it's clear you can look at it. Now, let's take, for example, if you have something, there's something in this world and you want to explain it, obviously it must have an ingredient. Right? It must have an ingredient. But it also has a form. So the ingredient and the form are together. Now, that for something to become an instrument, it must have an ingredient and a form. Otherwise, it can't be an instrument. And if it has an ingredient and a form, and then it bumps into something else, but it doesn't have a telos, that rudimentary telos, the power to produce an effect, then perhaps the stone will just pass through the other stone without making any effect at all, like that. And so these four, you can think they're aspects of causation, but they can never be separated from each other. In other words, to have a teleological cause means to have a form. The form is the substrate of the power to produce an effect. And when the substrate of the power to produce an effect produces an effect, it becomes an instrument on something else. So the four causes, in our mind, we can make them all separate things, but they can't be separated from each other. You can have an instrumental cause, for example, bringing together the form and the ingredient. And that's what God does. God brings together form and ingredient to manifest the world. He's the original instrumental cause. But in Vedic culture, you know, the conclusion of Vedanta is called abhinna nimittopadan. This is a very important phrase. This is what makes the difference between Vedanta and every other philosophy. In all other philosophies, the ingredient of the world is one thing, and the instrumental cause of the world, God, is another. He gets the ingredient and he creates it. But in Vedanta, it's called abhinna nimittopadan. There's non-difference between the ingredient and the instrument. God is both the instrument and the ingredient. God is the potter and the clay. God is the potter and the clay. And so when God, the potter, gets the clay and makes into a pot, that pot is also his form. Because he does not just make it like the potter makes it and it's separate from him. How does God, as the Nimitta Karan, make the forms of the world? In Vedic culture, you have Pradhan, it's described in the 3rd canto, and the Kirdakashai Vishnu enters into it and causes it to transform. And therefore, every form is primarily his form. And that's what Krishna saw in chapter 11 of the Bhagavad Gita. You see? Arjuna was in ignorance. He's upset. Oh, there's a war going on. There are two sides. If it's a lose-lose. If I fight, then I have to kill people I love. And if I don't fight, then that will be worse than death for a Kshatriya. And he's going through so many thoughts and he's depressed and he's having a crisis, existential crisis and a nervous breakdown. And he puts down his bow and said, Krishna, that's it, I'm not fighting. Right? But Krishna begins to speak to him transcendental knowledge. And in the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives him the vision of the universal form. And then Arjuna, he becomes enlightened and he says, oh, I was mistaken. It's all you. It's all you. Every form. All the soldiers on both sides. It's just you. That's the vision of the Virat Rup. That's the teaching of the Chatusloki Bhagavatam. Aham meva sameva grey nanyayat sarasaparam pascharaham yirechatsa yovisaseta sosmaham. Supreme Lord Krishna said to Lord Brahma, before the world existed, only I exist. And after the destruction of the universe, only I exist. But in the middle, actually no, only I exist. No buts. No buts. You see? So, really, this is where the classical philosophy falls short, because it makes a mental construct which mediates between the pradhan and the appearance of the forms. Whereas in Vedanta, abhinna nimittopadan, there's no mediation. And so by understanding, by hearing this, when the disciple is surrendered to his guru and he hears this, then he goes into a state of advaigyan, non-dual consciousness. You see, so if you follow the classical philosophy, you can get out of the ignorance of mechanism and understand that there's God, but you'll still be in dual consciousness at first, unless you attain theoria then. But so in the Vedanta, by understanding that actually all these causes, they're not separate, they are one. Have you heard that before? Iswaraha Paramaha Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadi Adi Govinda Savakarna Karanam. Oh Krishna, you are the cause of all the causes. You see? So, they cannot actually be separated. And so, when we overcome our mental abstraction and all those causes become united into one, the non-different ingredient and instrumental cause, abhinna nimitto upadana, then you go into the state of advaita, non-dual consciousness. After that, you can realize Krishna. You can't realize Krishna in the state of duality. Krishna is beyond duality. Krishna is beyond the gunas. You can think of Krishna like some historical person or some superhero from an old Indian, Amar Chitrakatar or something, some comic book. You can think about Krishna, but that's actually not Krishna. Krishna is a being that we begin to realize once we become free from duality and in Advai Gyan. So, the fallacy of reductionism, inseparability of causes. Now, all of this philosophy that we've discussed tonight is presented in the first line of Srimad Bhagavatam. We discussed many things, but it's all in the first line of Srimad Bhagavatam. What does it say there? Janmadhyasya yatanvayaditarataschatishu bigaswarat. So here, Janmadi means the Supreme Lord is the cause of Janma. So what does Janma mean? To take birth. Janma means when the Pradhan receives Jati. When the Pradhan receives a form. So the creation of the world is when the potential energy is given form by the Supreme Lord and it receives the Jatis. That's called Janma, the appearance or creation. So formal cause is described there. But who is the formal cause? Satyam Param Dhimahi. Yeah? Krishna. Asyo yatanvayad. The word anvayad means he's the direct cause of the world. So actually the word anvayad, according to Vishwacharya Thakur and all of our acharyas, anvay means the ingredient cause. And itara means anvayad, the direct cause and the other one, the opposite of that. So that means all the acharyas say itara means the instrumental cause. So formal cause, ingredient cause, instrumental cause, cha arteshu, and now the artas. He's conscious of all the teleological causes of the world, all the purposes. Everything has a purpose in God's creation, and he is aware of all the purposes, especially the purpose of each and every one of our souls. What will be our ultimate parama purushartha, our prem. So, and swarat means only he is independent. He is the only self-existent being, and everything else depends upon him. So, this is the essence of Vedanta given there in the very first line of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's actually similar to, it's Vyasadev's commentary on the first sutras. The first sutra of Vedanta is Om Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now inquire. One should inquire into the absolute truth. And then Janmadhyasya yataha. And then this is the Vyasadev's expanded explanation of the Vedanta Sutra, bringing out how Krishna is Sarva Karna Karanam, the cause of all causes. So now, we're looking at the fallacy of reductionism. Final causation cannot be reduced to instrumental causation because they're inseparable. The attempt to explain causal powers in terms of instrumental causation just defers the question by relocating the problem on the next level down. Okay, what does that mean? Let's say there's a stone. Let's come back to our stone again, right? So this stone has a power to affect other things. But what's the cause of its power to hit something else and produce an effect? So in reductionism, you'll say, well, the cause is the actual configurations of the atoms in the stone, right? That's where, because they're all joined together in a particular way, just like if you get graphite's just carbon, and you scratch it like a pencil, and it will just, it's very soft and it will leave a line like that. But if you get diamond, and then it will cut through anything. Why? Because the configuration of the atoms is stronger. It's different. It's stronger. So in reductionism, we'll say, oh yeah, well, this thing has this power to produce this effect because of the configuration of the parts. It's the aggregate of the powers of each one of the parts. So then you haven't answered the question, where does the effect come from? You've just located it in the next level down, right? Because you haven't answered the question at all. You just deferred it to a more micro level. So then you have to say, well, where did the parts get their power to produce this effect? And they say, well, that's out. It's the atoms. It's coming from the protons and the neutrons and the electrons and so on. So, but where did they get the power? So every time you try to explain teleology or final cause in reducing by reductionism, you never answer anything at all. You just defer the problem to the next level down. So a person will hear and just say, oh yeah, it's the atoms, or it's the this or that. And what is that? That's all an unfinished thought. It's a mental inertia that their mind just rolled and then came to a stop. They didn't really go into it. So when you reduce, where does it go? Where does it go? And so the actual cause of every effect is a God who's in the middle of every atom. Andantarasta paramanu chayantarastam govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. The cause of all effects is Supreme Lord within everything. If the Supreme Lord did not impart powers to things, they would have no powers at all. This is a very vast, like oceanic subject. If you think about it, you will have many, and pray, some grace will come. You'll have many realizations. So, the final causation of the powers of things cannot be answered by reductionism. It's just deferring the problem. And now another thing is that the final cause and formal causes, because they cannot be reduced, they're what is called discrete. They are discrete. Let's say if you make a graph of something accelerating, so you've got distance over time, and it's a line going up like this. And so you think about something accelerating, it's continuous. That means it goes through every gradation. 1 mile an hour, 2 mile an hour, 3, and everything in between, 2.1, 2.01, 2.00001. So something is continuous, right? So an instrumental cause, it seems when an instrumental hits something and it moves and it accelerates, it's like a continuous thing. But when we speak of causes, forms, and also effects, then they cannot be reduced. Either something makes an effect or it doesn't make an effect. Either something has a form or it doesn't have a form. So it's not a continuous thing, it's discrete. So that which is discrete cannot come about by stages. What is discrete has to be whole from the very beginning. It has to be just like, let's say, a vase. Someone takes a pot and makes a vase. So this shape of the vase was already an idea in the mind of the potter. It was discrete. He didn't just think, oh, I'll just stick something here and stick something there. It was a discrete unit of form in his mind, and he's made it. And that's the same because the teleological powers can't be reduced. They're all discrete as well. And therefore, all teleological powers and all forms of the world must have been pre-existing in a divine intellect. Understand? So this is why the classical world, when that was the main accepted philosophy, before the contraction into modern mechanistic thinking, that's why all the intellectuals and the various places of study, people believed in God. Because they didn't have the misunderstanding of the relation of the four causes that we presented first. They had the actual understanding. When you understand them actually, you'll see you can't reduce things. There must be a God with an intellect who has made everything according to his design. So, another interesting point here. Super interesting point. You know, this Vedanta Sutra that we're discussing, Vedanta philosophy, you know what it's really all about? Anabriti Shabdat, Anabriti Shabdat. It's about kirtan. There is no return. You don't return to this world because of Shabda, because of sound. And here's a graphic here. You see, there you are. You see that? All wrong. Okay. So, so one interesting point about Vedanta. In Vedanta, there's a sutra. It says, Characharo vyapasrayastu syat vyapadesho bhaktas tad bhakta bhavitvat. The meaning is this: because the Supreme Lord is the foundation of the forms of all moving and non-moving living entities, therefore every word is primarily a name of God and only secondarily refers to that object. This is very interesting. Vedanta Sutra says every word is a name of God. Well, how is that? How is that? Why? Because understand this, Janmadhyasya Tanmayat. The ingredient is the pradhan. Paramatma enters in and takes it on as his like costume, if you like, and he becomes every form of this world. So because every form in the world has a name, and every form is the different aspects of his universal form, so every word is primarily the name of God. And it's only secondarily what you think it is. This is a table. Yeah, it's my table. It's in my living room. It's in my lounge. But actually the word table indicates this form, which is manifested from the pradhan by Paramatma. So it's actually every word is a name of God. Now, is that useful in any way? What are the implications? Are you feeling the dhwani or the suggestions of this conclusion of Vedanta? The dhwani is this, that unknowingly, every living being at every moment who is speaking is doing kirtan. So kirtan, the glorification of God, isn't a choice. It's jaiva dharma. It's the dharma of the jiva. The living entities exist to glorify God, and that's what they do all the time. Either they know it or they don't know it. That's why Krishna Das Kaviraj says that Keho no mane sabataru das Jena mani tara hoy sarva papanash. This that papi sarvanash. Krishna Das Kaviraj says that keho na mani. Some people accept Krishna is God, and some people don't. But nevertheless, they're all his servants. So actually, everyone is engaging in kirtan because every word is a name of God. Oh, the sutra that says this, every vyapadesho bhaktastad bhava bhavitvat. The word bhavitvat means in the future when your sadhana is mature. In the future when your sadhana, you'll understand it. So if you're listening to me now, thinking, Prem Prayojan saying everyone's doing kirtan on every word, is Krishna's name, and like this, and mumbling, and you can't understand it and think I've gone crazy, then Vyasadeva saying, bhavitvat, go on with your sadhana and then you'll realize it. You see? So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was initiated by Srila Ishwara Puri in Gaya, when he came back and he was trying to teach Sanskrit in the Sanskrit school, all his students thought he was mad because he was saying what I'm saying today. They were asking, what's this verb? What's this noun? And he was explaining everything's Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. And all his students thought he was mad. They were trying to put some cooling oil on his head to calm him down. You see? And so what we're discussing today is actually the first teaching of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I mean, before that, he was like a puffed up scholar, right? He was an arrogant scholar. He was challenging everyone, arguing with logic and vyakaran. But after he received initiation, he was completely transformed, and he came back to Nadia, he came back to Navadvip as Rasik Nimai, Bhavuk Nimai. And when he began to explain grammar to his students, he was just saying basically what I'm saying this evening about every they asked him every question, what's the meaning of this? And it's Krishna, it's Krishna, it's Krishna, it's Krishna. You see? So Mahaprabhu's very first teaching in his pastime after he became transformed and did the pastime of being a devotee, is this very subject that we're discussing. And it's the essence of the Vedanta Sutra. You see, when Mahaprabhu came to his guru, he said, Gurudev, please teach me Vedanta. And Ishwar Prabhupada said, you're a murkha, you're a fool, you can't understand Vedanta. Just understand this. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam, kalo nashteva, nashteva, nashteva gatiranyata. And by chanting the holy name, he realized what actually Vedanta is all about. Right? So fascinating. Yes, Bhakti Vedanta. And the essence of of life for everyone is kirtan. So everyone's doing kirtan. Either you know it or you don't know it. Keho mani, keho namani. Saba tara das. Yena mani tara hoy. Papi sarvanash. But if you don't accept that Krishna is God and that kirtan is our inescapable full-time occupation, then you are papi, you are sinful, and you'll be ruined. So you might as well just accept it. You're doing it anyway. But you should do it consciously. Of course, Krishna has his primary names and secondary names, and so just like table and chair and things like, though they're the names of the forms within the universe, but they're not his primary names. So don't chant just the names of like regular household items. You should chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. What time is it? We're just getting started. Okay. I was going to speak about the first aid for chanting the holy name, but I got lost in this. I hope it wasn't too painful for you. But do you understand something? Raise your hand if it's interesting. Understand something? Right? Try to go, because very often discussions are very superficial. Sometimes we can come together as devotees and be superficial. And Krishna consciousness, it is simple, and that's also fine. But we also, after some years, have to go deeply into our tradition. Why did Param Gurudev establish Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti? Why did he give every sannyasi the name Bhakti Vedanta? Why did Srila Prabhupada establish the Bhakti Vedanta Book Trust? Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti, International Gaudiya Vedanta Society, and so on. Why? Because one day our acharyas expect that one day we'll mature and go deeply into the message and the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this way. So, just coming back to the presentation, the implications of the classical worldview that was there before our modern scientific disaster, so-called scientific, it's chaos. We've just demonstrated that the mechanistic worldview is completely riddled with contradiction and makes no sense. So, before that, in the classical worldview, 1, there's a prime mover God. 2, life has a purpose. And 3, the highest good is to contemplate God. What is that? That means the smartavya satatam Vishnu. Vismartavya na jatu chit. Sarva vidhi nishedashur upayor eva kinkara. The Vedas say there are only 2 rules. There are only 2 rules in life, and all the other rules, they're the servants of those 2 rules. The first rule is always remember Krishna. And the second rule is never forget Krishna. You see? And this is why the study of Vedanta comes, because when that consciousness comes, one actually experiences every single sound. Every sound becomes experienced as kirtan and the glorification of God. And Lord Brahma saw it. If you see in the Brahma Vimohan Leela, when Lord Brahma, he tried to steal the cows and boys, and when he came back, he saw Krishna was alone and he was searching, and then he looked at Krishna, and Krishna and he saw Krishna, all the coward boys and calves, and he was looking at them, and suddenly everyone manifested a Vishnu form. But not Krishna. All the cows and boys, they were all Krishna, but they manifested 4-arm Vishnu form everywhere. And Lord Brahma, it's described that he saw around each Vishnu form, there was every living entity, from blades of grass to animals and human beings and demigods and other Brahmas and everything. And every living entity, from Lord Brahma down to small blades of grass, they're all dancing around each form and doing kirtan. So that vision that Brahma had, that's actually the reality. That the entire universe is just singing the glories of God. That's why it's said in regard to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that Kaivalyam narakayate, didashapura akasha pushpayate, durdantendriya kalasapa, patali pratkata dangstrayate, Vishwam Purna Sukhayate Vidimahendra Dishtakirtayate Yat Karuna Katakshavaiba Babatam Tam Gaurameva Stumaha. Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati Thakur saying, when you get the merciful sidelong glance of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, you'll think that nirvana, liberation, is like hell. You'll think that going to heaven is just flowers in the sky, meaningless. You'll think that what's the use of yoga practice to control the senses? Because all your senses are like serpents with their fangs removed. They cannot bother you. And Vishwam Purna Sukhayate, you'll see, like Brahma saw, that the whole universe is full of joy and glorifying God. Vishwam Purna Sukhayate. Like Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, Atmoni Vedana Tuyapada Kori Hoinu Paramasuki Dukkha Durekalo Chintana Rohilo Chaudike Ananda Deke. I thought maybe, do you sing this song sometimes? You've got to sing this song. You have to sing this song every day. Atmani Vedana Tuyapada. Oh my Lord, since I surrendered my soul to you, Hoinu Paramasuk, it's been a cause of the greatest happiness to me. Dukkha Duregalo, all of my suffering has gone far away. Chintana Rohilo, not one anxiety is there in my mind. Chaudike Ananda, and I see joy in all four directions. Are you seeing joy in all four directions? Or not? Not seeing joy in all four directions. What does that mean? Maya. You are in Maya. So the purpose of the discussion of Vedanta is to bring us gradually. It's not just a metaphysics of something out there irrelevant. By hearing it, a psychological operation goes on inside us and rises us out of duality into that experience. Vishwam Purna Sukhayate, the whole universe is full of joy. Chaudikeya Ananda Deki, there's joy in all four directions. Kirtan, every sound is the glorification of the Lord. So when the material covering is the ear is pierced by Shabda Brahma, then everything becomes kirtan to that devotee. That was like the madness of Nimai Pandit when he came back to Navadvip. Okay, so now one thing we should know is that it's not that one day science is going to discover something that proves all these things we've been discussing wrong. That will never happen. Why? Because science cannot refute metaphysics because it's based on the same assumptions which are pre-scientific. You see? Science assumes two principles. One is called PSR, the principle of sufficient reason. If something happens, there was a reason why it happened. And the second one is called PPC in modern philosophy, the principle of proportionate causality. That if something happens, it's proportionate to the cause. You know, if a feather lands on the roof of your house, it's not going to cave in the house, right? If a huge rock lands, it might go through. So every effect is proportionate to the cause. So the principle of proportionate causality in our Vedic system is called Satkaryavad. Satkaryavad. That means the theory that the effect is already existing in a potential in the cause. And if the effect is not already a potential within the cause, it won't produce that effect. So that Satkaryavad is the principle of proportionate causality. For example, if you take mustard seeds and you grind them, you'll get mustard oil, right? Why? Because the mustard oil is already there, potentially. But if you take, this is a classical example, if you take sand and you grind it, will you get oil? You just get smaller pieces of sand, because there's no oil there. So these two principles, the principle of sufficient reason and the principle of proportionate causality, or what we called Satkaryavad, These are the pre-scientific assumptions of science itself. So this metaphysics can never be disproven by science because science itself is dependent upon it. You see? Let's say science tried to make an experiment to disprove the principle of sufficient reason and the principle of proportionate causality, right? Well, you can't do that because if the experiment proved it, it would also be prove that it was wrong. It would prove that it was right. Because for an experiment to work, there has to be the law of the principle of sufficient reason and proportionate causality. If there were no sufficient reason and proportionate causality, then every time you made an experiment, there would be a different result and nothing would be reproducible, which is a fundamental aspect of the scientific methodology, like that. So what we are saying, this philosophy, it can never be uprooted or disproven by science because it has inherently the same pre-scientific assumptions. Then, now, this is a very interesting thing. What we've discussed is the scientific worldview and how it came about by a contraction of the classical philosophy, by a misunderstanding of causation. So now we have reversed that distortion. If you had a mechanistic way of thinking, then by hearing this, that distortion has become reversed, and we've returned to the classical conception, which is like Aristotle, or we can say like Gautam Rishi. Now, we want to go from there to the Vedantic worldview. Remember I said we can't do it all in one step, we'll go step by step. So now we'll come to the Vedantic worldview. This topic is the superiority of the Vedic worldview over the classical worldview. What is that? The first thing is that in the classical teaching, the one basic teaching is the potential of one entity cannot be actualized unless it's actualized by an entity which is already actual in that respect. For example, if there's some water, the water is actually cold, but it's potentially hot. That potential is in it. It can be hot water, right? But in order to become hot water, that potential has to be actualized by something which is not potential but actually hot, fire. You see? So on the basis of this, the classical philosophy says that there must be a God because everything is moving. All things are manifesting their potential. But if one thing is being actualized by something else, but what's actualizing that and what's actualizing that? So there must be a prime mover. There must be a God who can actualize everything. But the mistake in the classical philosophy is this. They say the prime mover or God is fully actualized. He's fully actualized and he has no unactualized potential. Why? Because if God has any unactualized potential, according to the first principle, there'd have to be another God to actualize that potential. So he wouldn't be the last God. There'd have to be another God higher than him. Right? So that's the theory. So what they say is that the God of the classical world, the summum bonum or the prime mover, the God in classical philosophy, he's a fully actualized being and he doesn't have any potentials to actualize. And therefore, their concept of God, the prime mover, is he has no form and he has no activity. He's basically like an unembodied mind. And so that's what you see in many religions. Many people in Christianity, they think there's the Son and the Holy Spirit, but God the Father is a mystery. It's just like a vast unembodied mind because he has no unactualized potentials. And so the mistake here, and that's the same in Islam, so they don't allow you to make any images, right? You can't do that. Formless, no activity. And so this is a great limitation. Yes, there's a God, but the concept of God is so extremely limited. And what is the reason? The reason is this. You see, the idea is it's an inference from matter. Because a material thing which has a potential to be actualized has to be actualized by something else. Therefore, they take that analogy and they apply it all the way up, but they apply it to God. But there's no reason why the original cause would be like a helpless material thing that has no power to actualize its own potentials. Why would the original cause have the same characteristics as its products? There's no reason for that. And so God can be, we can even admit, he can be fully actualized in relation to the world, the inferior energies, but he can have potentials, unactualized potentials in relation to the spiritual world. And he does. His potentials are his Namakari Bahudani Jasavashak, in his name has potential that can manifest to you when you chant the holy name. His form in the spiritual world has potentials to play. His Leela is a manifestation of his potential. And his Shaktis are, his main Shakti is Radharani, actually. When we say all the Shaktis are in the name, the prime Shakti in the name is Radhika. And from Radhika comes Lalita and Vishaka and all the other gopis. And so, if you only follow the ascending process of the classical philosophy, because it's an ascending process, it has a ceiling. So we have to accept in the religious sphere, which is beyond philosophy, it takes you so far, but there has to be revelation. And the revelation of the Vedas tell us, no, God has potentials that are actualized simply by his will. Simply by his will. And that is the superiority of the Vedic revelation over the classical system, because the classical system leads to some kind of formless idea of God, whereas the Vedic system tells us the exquisite beauty. Kasturi tilakam lalata patale vakshastale kostubham nasagre paramoktikam kalatare venu kare kankanam savange harichandanam sulalitam kante chumuktavali gopastri parivestito vijayate Gopal Chudamani. Gopal Chudamani, the crest jewel of cowherd boys, wearing a tilak made of fragrant kasturi tilakam lalata patale vakshas. He has Kaustuba money on his red Kaustuba money on his chest. Actually, his Kaustuba money doesn't illuminate his chest. His chest illuminates the Kaustuba money. Is so beautiful. Sarvangai Harichandanam. He has sandalwood paste smeared all over his body. He's holding a flute in his hand and he's wearing bangles. Gopastri Paravest, and he's surrounded by Radhika and beautiful gopis, all glories to that crest jewel of cowherd boys. So how superior is the Vedic revelation that can take you from the very limited and mysterious conception of a prime mover to the actual sweet Raso Vaisaha, the embodiment of all rasa, Sri Krishna. So there we are. We'll complete our discussion here on Vedanta, and we made that journey from our modern conception of life, and we tried to reverse the distortion of modernity and come back to a more sanity of a previous time. But that's also a theistic time, but that's also incomplete. And then we showed what was lacking there and came to the full Vedic conclusion. So thank you for listening very patiently. Hare Krishna.